After World War II, thousands of German officers and wartime collaborators who supported the regime from France, Croatia, and other parts of Europe were looking for a new home. Many of them knew that they might be trialed and judged for their crimes and actions. Their goal was to flee, preferably as far away from the Nuremberg trials as possible. Well, the question is not about the reason of their running, which is obvious, but why did so many of them choose Argentina as their new home? When the Allies raised their flags in Berlin, and when the German instrument of surrender was signed on the eve of May 8, 1945, one thing was clear for these criminals and collaborators. Germany, and even the whole European continent, wasn't a safe place for them to stay or hide. Even if the entire regime collapsed and the war was over in Europe, that didn't mean the entire network that they had garnered had collapsed. Former admirers were still there. It's not like World War II ended in one day in 1945 and suddenly everyone realized how horrible the regime had been. Even after their defeat, there were many powerful men in Europe who had favored the cause and continued to do so. Just as an example, Spain was a neutral country, but was a friendly state and supporter of Germany. Spain was ruled by Francisco Franco and had been a tired and neutral country because of its civil war. For some time, many fugitives would find themselves in a safe spot here, but will use Spain as a bridgehead to other destinations. Also, some Swiss important leaders had been outspoken in their support of Germany. These men were in a position to help out. Even the Catholic Church was helpful for some of these fugitives. Several high-ranking church officials actively aided in their escape. There was a window of time to escape justice and possible trials. Those who wanted to flee had to consider their options in a short period of time in order to hide elsewhere and adopt new identities. Across the ocean, in Argentina, President Juan Domingo Perón was more than ready to welcome those former Axis members with open arms. President Perón was an admirer of the German ideology of that time. He helped numerous war criminals to flee with the support of his own diplomats and intelligence agents deployed in Europe. Argentina supported ways for their transit through passages from Italy and Spain to Buenos Aires. During World War II, Argentina clearly favored the Axis because of its president and probably because of close cultural ties with Germany, Italy, and Spain. Argentina was a former Spanish colony, and they achieved independence at the beginning of the 19th century. Through decades-long migrations of Italians and Germans created strong ties to these European countries. Argentina was a pro-Italian and pro-Germany country, and this was due to the fact that most Argentines were of Spanish, Italian, or German descent. The German government saw their sympathy, and the two countries created special links between each other. In Argentina were many German spies, and also Argentine officers and diplomats held important positions in Europe. Perón's government admired some totalitarian behaviors and tried to lead his country more in the direction of large military parades and militarization. Many important and influential Argentines, as wealthy businessmen or members of the government, were openly supportive of the Axis cause. Even the president Juan Domingo Perón himself had served as an adjunct officer in the Italian army in the late 1930s. Thus, there were special bonds between Germany, Italy, and Argentina. But even in this situation, Argentina would eventually declare war on the Axis powers within just a month before the war ended. But some Argentine agents worked to help defeated German officers to escape after the war. There was a financial reason for Argentina to accept these men. Some wealthy Germans and Argentine businessmen of German descent were willing to pay the way for escaping runners. In 1945, as the Allies were cleaning the last remnants of the Axis, for many it became clear that the next great conflict would come between the capitalist USA and the communist USSR. Some people, including Perón and some of his advisors, predicted that a new world conflict would break out soon between the Allies and the Communists. This thought was seen so realistically by many. And in this upcoming inevitable conflict, third parties such as Argentina could tip the balance one way or the other. Perón envisioned Argentina taking its place as a crucially important diplomatic third party in the war and emerging as an important actor on the world map. Knowing that these fugitive criminals were also anti-communist, the Argentinian president thought that these men would come in useful in the possible upcoming conflicts between the USA and the USSR. The Argentine president also sought to recruit more of these fugitives, in particular those with military and technological expertise that he believed could help his armies and technological advances. This thought was pretty much the same as in other cases. An example could be the United States and the Soviet Union, who both poached scientists to assist them in military and technological matters. Even if for so many, Argentina represented a new home, a new way to live, untouched and hidden, but the situation slightly changed. Time had passed and the Cold War dragged on. In time, these men would eventually be seen as they initially were. The support for them fled away with time. But Argentina was not the only place in South America that accepted them. Many others eventually found their way to other countries in the region. Hundreds migrated to places like Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and other parts of the continent. For those who Argentina became an option after 1945, the situation changed just 10 years later, after Perón's government fell in 1955. There was a fear that the new administration might not see with good eyes their existence on Argentine soil and could send them back to Europe, mainly due to the new government's hostility towards Perón and all his former policies. Over time, the presence of so many became something of an embarrassment to the country. By the 1990s, most of these aged men were living openly under their own names. A handful of them were eventually tracked down and sent back for trials. Many others have lost their mark and were assimilated into Argentina's sizable German community and probably never talked about their past again. Runners escaped to Argentina and South America through a system of escape routes called rat lines. These escape routes mainly led towards Latin America, particularly countries like Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Colombia, Brazil, Uruguay, and others. There were two primary routes. The first went from Germany to Spain, then Argentina. The second one was from Germany to Rome to Genoa, then South America. This happened because of the willingness of some countries to accept these people and because some important figures who had a form of sympathy to them. But there is also another big reason for their escape to Argentina: geography. Looking at the map of 1945, we can see that Europe was obviously not a good place to hide. Even if some of these people found themselves in countries like Portugal, Spain, or Switzerland. Looking in the east, there was the Soviet Union, the conflict in China and Japan, and some allied colonies. Looking south, Africa was mainly a huge colony of France and Great Britain. In the west, there was the US and Canada. But from the US-Mexican border to the south, the option to run seemed plausible. Considering all options, Latin America was the only part of the world where true chances for a new life existed, even if, after some time residing there, some of them were caught. And from all these states, Argentina seems the best option, considering the openness of the Argentinian government at the end of the war to accept these criminals, collaborators, and others who fled. We want to thank you so much for watching this video, and to express our gratitude to our few but very generous Patreon supporters. You can too support our channel by clicking the link in the description. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that bell button in order to see more animated history videos.
This is Duke University.
Okay, hi, my name is Jenna Olin. I'm going to start out on a bit of a happier note than Jolene's, a rescue effort in a genocide, so a bit more optimistic this time around. So, as you can see from this picture up here of Franco, which is Spain's fascist leader during World War II, there was Hitler. I'm writing my senior thesis on Spain and the Jewish rescue effort during the Holocaust. So, I picked this topic because it intersects with a lot of my interests. I'm a history and ICS double major, as Sherry said earlier, and I'm also a Spanish minor. I'm Jewish, and I also studied abroad in Madrid, so this is kind of like a combination of all of my interests converged into one. I recently returned to Madrid in August and September for about a week to do research in the archives of the Central Administration and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so I was very fortunate to get that experience. So today, my story begins with examples of 3 Spanish diplomats and their efforts to help the Sephardic or Spanish Jews escape Nazi-occupied territories during the Holocaust and to help them travel from their homes through Spain and onto a safe destination. So I'm going to give a brief, a little summary about the actions of these life-saving diplomats. To start off, Bernardo Roland, who was the Spanish consul general in France, and he used his jurisdiction to help save a lot of Sephardim. Because of the shared border of France and Spain and the Pyrenees mountain range between them, France was located in a geographically very convenient location to help save a lot of these Jews. So to do this, Roland granted a lot of visas and helped these Jews pass between the two countries. A lot of complaints were received by Germany to Spain, and they were deemed diplomatic insubordination. Franco never fully verified or accepted these visas always, but Roland often went against direct orders that he received just to help these Jews. Next is Sebastian Romero Radivales, who was a Spanish consul general in Greece. At a greater geographical distance from Spain, it was easier for Spanish diplomats to push the limits of the Franco regime's authority. So he took his own personal measures to save 500 to 600 Spanish Jews. And he also petitioned the Spanish government on these Jews' behalf and actually was able to get Germany to agree to the repatriation of these Jews to Spain. However, at the final moments, Franco's regime failed to follow through with this endeavor. But it wasn't anything on Radivales' part. The slippage was completely the Franco regime's own problems. But his efforts were very incredible, and he still managed to save many Jews. Here he is on an Israeli postage stamp honored for his brave efforts during World War II. So finally, Julio Palencia was a Spanish consul in Bulgaria, and this was actually one of the furthest consuls from Spain. And because of this distance, like in Greece, he was able to push the limits of the Franco regime's authority. His strong pro-Jewish sentiments earned him the nickname the well-known friend of the Jews in German correspondence. The Jewish community in Bulgaria, as in all of these places, was very strong. A lot of people ask me, how did you know they were Spanish? I don't understand. They're in Bulgaria. Aren't they Bulgarians? But actually, many of these Jews continued to speak Spanish as their primary language. They wrote in a Hebrew-Spanish language called Ladino, which is Spanish but written in Hebrew characters. And they had a beautiful temple decorated in a Spanish style in the center of Bulgaria. So their ties to Spain were still very strong, and they considered it their homeland. Most notably, Palencia surprised even his own diplomatic colleagues when he adopted a Sephardic Jewish family's children who were in peril. For the most part, Franco never stopped many of these actions, but this action was too far, and he was actually removed from his diplomatic post. So in these 3 cases, Spanish diplomats made repeated and systematic efforts to save Sephardic Jews from the Nazis. These efforts on the part of Spanish diplomats abroad needed a counterpart in Spanish immigration policy in order to be effective. So part of the reason for the success in saving these Jews was the fact that they were allowed to enter Spain with no problem. The reason for this was that they were considered Spanish citizens. They were granted this citizenship in 1924 with the Primo de Rivera decree, which treated them like any other Spanish citizen despite the fact that they were Jewish. Franco's minister of the foreign minister, General Gomez Jordana, described this process up here, going through the country like the light goes through glass without a trace. This light through glass metaphor, which is alluded to in the title of my lecture, indicates that these Jews were allowed in Spain, but only for a limited time basis. So they were allowed to go from their country of origin, stay in Spain for 30 days, and remain in transit, and then had to continue on to a third safe destination. So typically this was either to the United States or countries in South America where they fit in pretty well because they already spoke Spanish. This may have been due to the fact that there was a fear that these Jews would influence Spain in a negative way. So in some ways there was definitely still an element of anti-Semitism there. But regardless, it's still remarkable that the Spanish government, a fascist regime associated with Nazi Germany, was helpful on any level to the Jews during World War II. It's really fascinating to consider how these fascist pariahs of the Western world, Italy as well as Spain, actually made the most concerted efforts to save their own Jews during the Holocaust. So I'd like to explore some reasons for this possible historical conundrum. So in terms of the place of the Sephardim in Spain's collective memory, the year 1492 is a very notorious year in Spanish history. It's the year in which the Catholic kings of Spain, Isabel and Ferdinand, issued the Edict of Expulsion that expelled all of the Jews and Muslims from Spain. The Hebrew word for Spain is Sepharad. Thus, the Spanish Jews are called Sephardim, and their expulsion and subsequent dispersal throughout the rest of Europe is known as the Spanish diaspora. Here on the map, you can see in red the 1492 expulsion. These Jews went to three principal areas. The first was to Portugal and northern Africa, so largely Morocco. The second area was northern Europe, and the third was Muslim Ottoman Empire, where they lived in harmony and peace for many years. The Inquisition continued in Spain into the 19th century. This was a tribunal body that tried to weed out the influence of any clandestine Jews that remained in the country. However, at the same time as this reactionary action was taking place in Spain, Jewish emancipation, where they gained their rights, took place throughout the rest of Europe. The generalized emancipation of European Jewry and the fact that emancipation was understood as the prime indicator of enlightenment and modernity resulted in Spain's international reputation as backwards. At the same time, the expulsion continued to deeply impact the Spanish collective memory and account in many ways for the context in which Franco and his rogue diplomats acted during World War II. The idea that the expulsion represented a historical blunder was popularized specifically in the year 1898 when Spain lost the remnants of its historical empire. In its following post-imperial identity crisis and economic recession, many Spaniards looked back on their history and tried to identify and reevaluate problems in their past. Many Spaniards came upon the expulsion and started to blame this one event in Spanish history, despite the fact that it took place so many centuries before, as a reason for the series of crises that had been hitting Spain for years. So in the 20th century, Spaniards attempted to undo what they believed to be a great folly, which was expelling the Jews. To do this, they granted them citizenship, as I said, in 1924. That's where that came from. So up here I have the Guernica, which is a very famous painting. It's located in the Reina Sofia in Madrid, and I was fortunate enough to go see it myself. But it has a very important symbolic significance, as the Spanish Civil War was the perfect opportunity for Franco to use the Sephardim for his own self-fashioning purposes. The inhumane actions of Franco's nationalist forces against the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War are symbolized for the world to see here. Franco's government, perhaps in a propagandistic campaign, later claimed an enlightened and liberal treatment of the Sephardim during World War II. Most likely, Franco authorized this action and this propaganda and good treatment of the Jews to downplay his own atrocities and to contrast his own brutal fascist regime with Hitler's and try to kind of seem more liberal and enlightened, I guess, in comparison. In all of these instances, we see the ways in which Franco's treatment of these Jews is a tool for him. He construed to the other Spanish or the other European states Spain's enlightenment and national culture in contrast to his own international reputation as backwards and reactionary. So here I have a picture of an archival document I came across while I was doing research in Spain. Their correspondence with Germany and how it kind of represents how they were allies during the war. So the role that Franco's government, which claimed to but didn't actually take direct responsibility for helping these foreign Jews, really has to be distinguished from the active diplomatic aid on behalf of his diplomats. Multiple Spanish diplomats all across Europe took matters into their own hands to save a lot of Jews. This wasn't the case of a singular anomalous individual. It was systematic and organized. So this is particularly intriguing because members of the international diplomatic community often try not to take strong actions and upset the fine balance of things in a diplomatic setting. But given the widespread nature of interventions, I have tried in my thesis to suggest reasons for this. In many cases, it's hard to definitively show or prove these explanations, but many of them can be suggested through archival and secondary research. So what is definitely clear from my research is the fact that these Spanish diplomats and their actions during World War II are directly connected to the history of the Spanish diplomatic corps. For one, the majority of diplomats came from the higher echelons of society. They shared class, cultural, and educational connections with the Sephardim, which may have created a sense of empathy and accounted for their life-saving actions. It is also clear that during World War II, a vacuum of centralized leadership and rule existed, so that Spanish diplomats were able to take actions without the full consent of Franco, but without fearing any sort of major repercussions. The types of violations committed by these diplomats were often dramatic departures from official state policy, and they demonstrate the bounds of power and power relations in a loose and far-flung bureaucratic system. I could see in my research in the archives writers feigning understanding, skirting issues, and pretending to be compliant with policy while actually acting directly in opposition to these policies that Franco had asked them to fulfill. Part of the reason for this was the fact that Franco did not establish a clear agenda for his diplomats or an institutionalized training system for them until the year 1942. The institutionalization of the diplomatic corps clearly represents Franco's attempt to correct the diplomatic problems that actually occurred during World War II and to create a cohort of diplomats that was an extension of his regime with similar ideological leanings as him. Finally, it is reasonable to surmise that the Spanish Civil War had a profound impact on the Spanish diplomatic corps. The Spanish form of fascism wielded its own power and had its own ideologies, which were independent of German National Socialism. Often, fascism is grouped together as one huge conglomerate, Italy, Germany, Spain. But in Spain's case, this was definitely not true. In this context, the Sephardim, who were recently offered citizenship, became symbols of Spanish national pride, an enlightened exception consistent with Franco's ideology surrounding the self-fashioning of his own unique regime. So ultimately, these rescuers deserve recognition for their roles and brave actions that they took during World War II. Up here, I have a list by Yad Vashem, which is a Holocaust Remembrance Museum in Jerusalem. These Righteous Among the Nations it's an attempt for this museum to recognize individuals who saved Jews during the war. So as you can see, countries such as Poland, the Netherlands, France have thousands of individuals on this list and who are recognized. However, Spain only has 6 individuals, and none of the 3 that I talked about today are on that list. So to me, this is extremely fascinating. and it's a very hard anomaly to explain or to understand why one country would have such little recognition while others would have so much. So to me, this lack of recognition is probably attributable to diplomatic problems between Madrid and Jerusalem, as well as the charged history of Jews in Spain. It was not until January 17, 1986, that diplomatic ties between Spain and Israel even began, which restored the long historical link between Spain and the Jews. Before this moment, the two countries had a very antagonistic relationship, which was clearly indicated when Israel was established, and it failed to send a telegram announcing its establishment only to Germany, all Arab nations, and Spain. So pretty much the only Western European nation besides Germany. So in conclusion, my work attributes to possible answers to the historical puzzle of Spanish help to Jewish refugees during World War II. To me, these answers stem from an understanding of the importance of the Sephardim to Spain's nationalistic self-definition, and from an awareness of the context in which Spanish diplomats operated, both literally and figuratively, from the Franco regime. Beyond providing ways to comprehend an important and relatively unacknowledged aspect of Holocaust history, my work calls attention to the importance of contingency and competing interests in historiography. So thank you for your time, and I'm also looking forward to any questions.
In the small town of Dragør on the Danish coast, there's a small plaque. A reminder of a time when Denmark was not the oasis of calm it is today. A time when fishermen up and down the coast risked everything, putting their humble vessels in harm's way for the sake of their fellow men. The story of these unlikely heroes goes back to 1939. At that time, everyday life in Denmark appeared normal, but it was an uneasy calm that would not last. The Nazis had invaded Poland, starting the Second World War. Denmark, hoping to remain neutral, negotiated a non-aggression pact with the Germans. Yet there was a sense the country was living on borrowed time. On April 9, 1940, less than a year after the agreement had been signed, the Danes' worst fears were realized. The Nazis flooded Denmark with troops from land and sea, an invasion that lasted just 6 hours. The government surrendered after 2, deciding it was better to negotiate their fate rather than fight to the bitter end. In a twist, Hitler chose to treat Denmark as a model protectorate rather than a conquest, a way to illustrate how Europe in the future would look under the Nazis. The police and judicial system were actually left in Danish hands, and King Christian X remained head of state. The uncomfortable arrangement that allowed the illusion of normalcy soon began to unravel as the Germans tightened their grip on the country, implementing censorship, banishing the Communist Party, and increasing their scrutiny of the Jews.
Hvad skal der ske med os?
What is going to happen to us? Everyone asked. There was much fear in the air and discrimination, but it was subtle so as not to upset the rest of the Danish people.
By late 1942, the resistance was gaining strength and momentum. Yet in a strategic blunder, the Germans allowed national elections the following spring. Almost 90% of the population voted and overwhelmingly rejected the Nazis. Strikes and protests came next, but the authorities quickly outlawed any public assembly, and a curfew was instituted when the resistance continued to attack. Finally, on August 29, 1943, martial law was instituted. Having negotiated with the Social Democrats and dispersed the Communists, the Germans turned their eyes to the Jews. After having harassed them for years, they undertook a secret plan in September to sweep up the entire community on the night of the Jewish New Year, when they thought all the Jews would be at home.
Min mor, hun var...
My mother was an Orthodox Jew, but she didn't practice, and though my father was a Christian, she and I had to flee for our safety.
As the army marched house to house, they were stunned to find no one. Nearly all the Jews had vanished, having been tipped off about the impending purge. The race to escape was on. The Jews headed for coastal ports, knowing freedom lay just across the Öresund Strait. Neutral Sweden had committed to accept the Jewish refugees. While some Germans turned a blind eye towards the fleeing population, others conducted a relentless search. No place was safe.
For the local, it was a big risk. People should understand that it was very dangerous to help the Jewish people.
Yet help the locals did, displaying remarkable courage in the face of a terrifying foe. They hid the Jews by day, then slipped them onto fishing boats for the stealth voyage at night. It took almost 2 months.
They was hidden under the nets. They could hear what happens. And you imagine how scary it was for them.
Despite the locals' best efforts, some Jews were captured. Others had to make life-changing decisions in a moment.
Men hun var jo alene, og ingen af jøderne vidste jo, om de kom levende over til Sverige.
My mother, she was alone, and none of the Jews knew if they would make it to Sweden alive. So she made the decision to leave me with one of the fishermen's families until after the war. I was devastated, but knew my mother had given me my best chance at life.
More than 600 times the boats crept out into the darkness, slowly making their way toward the beacon of freedom. More than 99% of Danish Jews managed to survive the war. A remarkable statistic when compared to the casualties experienced by Jews in other European countries.
Many Danish people helped me in dangerous times. And after the war, I was lucky enough to find my parents again. So fate was very kind to me.
Så skæbnen var rigtig mild mod mig.
The rescue of the Danish Jews is a proud moment in the turbulent times of World War II that simply must not be forgotten.
The unknown history and the unrecorded history, which is indeed a paradox, is that Japan, which was the closest ally of Nazi Germany and was part of the axis of Japan, Italy, and Germany, despite that agreement, Japan went out of its way to save Jews.
ある日のことですね、JTB から送られてきました日本交通公社70年史、という、分厚い写真ですねを見ておりましたところ、 JTB はかつて1940年代ですか、ユダヤ難民の輸送に従事したという項目があってですね。
So we were in Vilnius, where were able to escape from Poland by car, by horse-drawn carriage, by any means. And there were a bunch of, quite a few refugees actually in Vilnius, hoping to be able to get out of Europe. So then the Jewish refugees went to the Japanese consulate, which was really the only one open in Kovno at the time, because the Russians were advancing and were closing all of the consulates, and said, we have a destination, because they wanted a transit visa through Japan. Now, what is a transit visa? A transit visa means you have some destination. You're not going to be there forever, but none of them had any destination. Now, there was a remarkable consul that at that time in Kaunas, and he was Chuna Sugihara, and so he signed passport after passport with the Japanese visa.
Jews escaped to Siberia, to Vladivostok on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and then took a ship, a small ship, from Vladivostok to the Japanese port city of Tsuruga on the Sea of Japan.
I don't think we stayed in Vladivostok. I think we just almost immediately got on the ship. This was the ship from Vladivostok to Tsuruga. Subsequently, my father said that he had heard shortly after our voyage the Russians had actually come looking to arrest him, so we really got out just in time.
ユダヤ難民の輸送に従事したという項目があってですね、非常に関心を惹かれて読んでいくうちにその業務に従事したのが大迫達夫というですね、当時の職員だったという記述がありましてですね、大変驚いたんです。で、その理由は、後年私が1966年に JNTO に就職した際のボスが大迫さんだったんですね。大迫さんが私にですね、その回想記を見せてくれた時にですね、ついでにこれも見てくださいというふうに示されたのがですね、古びたアルバムだったんですが、その中になんとですね、大迫さんが船の上でお世話をしたユダヤ難民の人たちの写真7枚の写真がありましてね、でそのうち1枚が男性、あと6枚は女性の写真でですね、驚いたことにそれぞれの写真の裏にはですね、本人の手書きのメッセージが残されていました。でその内容はですね、大変お世話になったという感謝の念が記されていましたですね。で、言葉もですね、フランス語、ドイツ語、ポーランド語、ブルガリア語、果てはノルウェー語というふうに多岐にわたっていまして、ということで、当時、ヨーロッパのいろんな国からの難民が日本に逃れてきたんだなということが、伺えたわけです。
They would mention the wonderful, kind, enthusiastic, human welcome they received from the crew of JTB. They did not know the word JTB. They knew it was a ship. This ship and JTB, the arrangement was made in New York with the Jewish organizations. And so the refugees were not a part of that. They just knew that they had a ticket on the ship. But they saw in the eyes and the smile of the crew members that they were in safe hands and they would reach safety. So they became survivors because of the kindness of the Japanese.
大迫さんがその海上輸送の任に当たった時期はですね、冬の期間が多かったものですから、やはり最初の航海はですね、荒れた日本海の荒波に、揺られてですね、大変な船酔いに悩まされたと。それでもうほとんどの時間ですね、ベッドに横たわって何も食べることができなかったと。とはいえ中にはいいお天気の日もあってですね、そういった時は甲板で、健康維持のために散歩をしたというようなことが記されていますね。
The Japanese were unfailingly kind, really unfailingly kind. I think they must like children, as they were especially kind to children.
They all came with a visa of 10 to 14 days. transit visa, which means that you're leaving. But they had no place to go.
So we had to get a ship to take us from Japan to the United States. Now, other people were going to Palestine. Some people were going to, there were a few other countries, but most countries did not want to take the Jews in.
The 10-day visa became 20 days, 30 days, 40 days, 50 days. You cannot stay in a country when your visa expires. They know who you are. You're not Japanese. They know exactly who you are and what you're doing. But the foreign minister of Japan arranged for all the visas to be extended almost forever. So the Jews had a permanent place to stay, even though they came on a 10 to 14-day transit visa.
で最後の部分ではですね、こういったいろいろ苦労があったけれども、私たちその JTB の社員、ビューローマンはですね、そのお世話をしたユダヤ難民の人たちに、喜ばれるように一生懸命尽くしたと。でそれは民間外交官の精神でもってやったことは、間違いないことだと、自負しているというふうに回想記は締めくくられています。
Paris, the city of light. From the Eiffel Tower to the Arc de Triomphe, this jewel of Europe is home to magnificent monuments that draw tourists from all over the world. Many of them come to gaze in wonder at the spectacular churches, like Notre Dame. But just a mile from that famed house of God sits another stunning place of worship, unknown to many. The Grand Mosque of Paris.
The Grand Mosque of Paris is a wonderful structure on the left bank. It is the central focus of Islam in Paris, and indeed it is probably the most distinct and important Muslim architectural institution in all of Europe.
The Grand Mosque was built in 1926 as a token of gratitude for the 100,000 North African Muslims who fought and died for France in World War I. It is a marvel of design and beauty. But there is another hidden facet of the Grand Mosque. A mysterious legend whispered for decades, but known only to a few.
The details of individual cases are very difficult to identify.
What are the secrets locked inside the Grand Mosque of Paris? And what role did this house of worship play in one of the most wrenching episodes in modern history? 9 months into World War II, German forces conquer France and set up the Vichy government. The collaborationist regime assists in carrying out Adolf Hitler's Nazi program, which includes rounding up Jews and sending them to concentration camps. To help carry out their plan, the Nazis attempt to recruit local Muslims.
The German strategy was to try to reach out to a significant Muslim community in France to try to win them over to the German side.
The Germans begin with Kadur ben Gabrit, a well-respected Muslim elder and the head of the Grand Mosque. In public, ben Gabrit is friendly and cooperative with the Nazis. But privately, he is hatching a secret and dangerous plot. The Grand Mosque will hide Jews from the Nazis.
The mosque gave Jews certificates of Muslim identity. You could pass as Muslim if you had this birth certificate or certificate from the mosque.
While some Jews evade detection with the fake documents, the mosque simply doesn't have enough to go around. So Ben Gabrit ratchets things up, this time using the mosque itself.
The underground pathways underneath the mosque, which led out to other streets and other neighborhoods, were places where Jews and others were protected.
Ben Gabrit's plan to hide Jews in these passageways is soon put to the test.
There was one very celebrated testimony from a gentleman named El.Alvarez.
Asulin, a North African Jew, escapes from a German prisoner of war camp. After days of traveling in secret, he arrives in Paris and makes his way to the Grand Mosque. But in the Nazi-occupied city, Asulin is far from safe. While he and other Jews are hiding inside, German soldiers suddenly raid the mosque.
The mosque would trigger a series of lights that would flash when the Germans were about to enter the premises of the mosque, and Jews would recognize these lights and would find hiding places within the catacombs, behind closet doors.
Asulin uses these catacombs to escape, owing his life to the Grand Mosque.
It wasn't so much Muslims saving Jews as an interreligious act of faith. It was really Algerians and Moroccans and Tunisians helping other Algerians, Moroccans, and Tunisians despite a religious difference.
But the mosque's commitment to saving Jews is about to face its greatest challenge yet. In wartime Paris, a pop singer named Salim Halali is a big hit in town.
Halali was one of the most famous singers of the day, very known in the Parisian nightlife.
Halali is also a Jew. And when the Nazis decide to seize him, the Grand Mosque of Paris becomes his last desperate hope for survival. But can the mosque help save one of the most famous men in France? France, the Grand Mosque of Paris. At the height of World War II, the mosque is secretly hiding Jews right under the noses of the occupying Nazis.
There was a natural willingness of some of the leaders of the mosque to assist countrymen who were facing severe, life-threatening danger because of the Nazi occupation.
That danger extends to the Muslims themselves, including the mosque's leader, Kadur ben Gabrit, who is about to put everything on the line to help save someone seemingly impossible to hide, a famous Jewish pop singer named Salim Halali.
He was Jewish from Algeria. He thought that he would be immune from the Germans because he was so famous. But of course, he wasn't. And he got word that the Germans were going to come after him.
Ben Gabrit secretly supplies Halali with fake papers that say he is a Muslim. And then, Ben Gabrit takes an even bolder step.
He had a tombstone at the Muslim cemetery outside Paris engraved with Halali's father, so that Halali could say when the Germans came after him, "See, I'm Muslim, I'm not Jewish. Just go check the cemetery. You'll see where my father is buried."
Surprisingly, the Nazis are fooled, and Halali survives the war.
And he, to his dying day, and you can check the obituaries of Halali, thanked Ben Gabrit for saving his life.
Ben Gabrit, for his part, keeps silent on the mosque's role in hiding Jews. When he dies in 1954, he is buried in a wall of the mosque, taking the secrets of the rescue mission with him. Today, the Grand Mosque of Paris attracts both worshippers and visitors from all over the world. And its heroic efforts still resonate for all who walk through its doors.
It's a story that everybody can appreciate because it's a universal story of rescue and protection at a time of intense danger. And that brings a very faraway culture right at home.